Like, what you don't want to do is, like, number one, talk yourself out of being someone making something a bigger deal than it actually is or it could be. Or you don't want to shove something under the rug and then later it becomes this big problem.
What's up, fam? Welcome back to our channel. My name is Tim. This is my beautiful wife, Pauline, and you're tuning in to another episode of the W Podcast, where you get wisdom in the word with the
Wheelers.
Hey! So we are so excited to be back this week. We are still in our Question of the Day series. Week 3 of being back in it. How you feeling? You feel like you're getting adjusted to this podcast in a way?
I am always adjusting. I think having 2 kiddos now, that's just the name of the game, is adjusting. So.
Yeah. So remember, if you have a question about love, faith, sex, dating, marriage, whatever it may be, you can ask us a question anonymously. We won't know that you asked it, so you can say whatever you want. You can give as much detail as you want, and we'll do our best to get to it. And there's a form right in our bios on all of our social media handles that you can submit that question. So we'll be looking through that and trying to answer your questions. But this week, are you ready to read the question?
Yeah, it's an interesting one for sure.
Aren't they all interesting?
Would it,
some more than others?
For sure. I mean, just because think about it, it's different people. People talk differently.
I'm sure last week's had some of the group chats buzzing.
Maybe.
Sure.
I mean, just the way people.
Some of y'all thought twice about that massage you had. Anyway.
Maybe. I don't know.
Or you said, God, thank you that I'm pure in my heart.
Or maybe you're just like, what massage club do you go to? Because some people don't have that problem.
Anyway, let's stay focused. What is this week's question?
I like when we get a little bit distracted. Keeps people on their toes. Okay. So the question is, serious question. Is someone who doesn't cuss a preference? Like, we can work through that, or is it a deal breaker? Like, I hear that and I'm moving on.
Yeah, so
kind of choppy wording, but I think what they're saying is it okay that I prefer somebody who doesn't cuss, or am I being too picky?
Yeah, that's a one way to read that, essentially. And y'all bear with us. Obviously, Pauline's voice is a little raspy.
I like having a raspy voice, though. That's the problem.
All right. But because I don't think the people's eardrums can hit as like they might.
Some
be
people like raspy
saying?
Voices.
Anyway, I had a point why I said that. If you rock with us, if you love us, if this podcast is valuable to you, definitely keep us in your prayers. Because since we came back, the warfare has been trying to take us out. But guess what? Greater is He in me than He in the world. So all the prayers that you have for us, we will definitely take it in Jesus' name. But yes, this person is like, yo, I don't cuss, I'm assuming, because why would it be a deal breaker for you if you did cuss? That'd be hypocritical. But there are some hypocrites out here. So I'm going to take it from that stance. You're a person that doesn't cuss, but there's somebody you're interested in who may cuss. Maybe you heard a word or two and you're like, should that be an automatic deal breaker or not?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this question just really boils down to preferences, preferences and then like lifestyle and sin, like is cussing a sin and that type of thing. They didn't ask that, but it kind of comes down to that, because like if you're a Christian looking to date another Christian and you think this person's a Christian and then you hear them cussing, that would be more like because even like, let's take it out of a dating context, like if you have a friend who's cussing, would that bother you if you're somebody who, because if you can tell your experience and your kind of side of the story, but if you go through a period of your life when you're cussing, you don't cuss, like you stop cussing for whatever reason, saved or not, and you're around people who cuss a lot, it bothers you, right?
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, it can.
It's kind of like when
it depends on who you are.
It's kind of like if you don't drink and. Like,
well, let me say this. I think it depends on the environment, because obviously when you go to work, I mean, it still may bother you, but you're not expecting them to not cuss. So I just feel like it's not the same.
You expect people to cuss at work. It's kind of like unprofessional. It's like watching what is it? Primetime television.
People still be doing it.
Right, but they're not. It's not really like people always kind of preface it like, "Oh, excuse my language," or like
sometimes.
Right. Okay.
So,
but that's just it's like kind of impolite. Like you don't cuss in front of your grandma type of thing.
It's a different world. It's a different world. Anyway, I think there are levels to sin in the sense of having a conversation with somebody and being interested with them. I'm not saying there's levels to sin in the sense that one sin is better than the other, even though we could have a Bible verse discussion about that. But for example, if somebody struggles with gluttony, is that an automatic deal breaker? Like, are you automatically going to be like, no, I'm not dating you?
Well, let's talk about it, because this all comes down to kind of tolerance. Because is gluttony, I eat a whole bag, box of Oreo Thins by myself? Or is gluttony, I'm over 600 pounds? How do you draw the line? Because both are bad. I mean, one's an instance. That's
fair, but this is where I was going with that, because it can be somewhat gray. But if you're dating somebody or talking to somebody that struggles with trying to have sex with you, the Bible's clear on you need to run away from that.
Yeah.
So that's my point when I say there's levels to sin, in the sense of, should you have a conversation with somebody that you're interested in, or should you automatically just be like, I'm not messing with you?
Fair. But, I mean, it's kind of interesting, though, because if we're going to compare sins, which we shouldn't do, but we're doing for the sake of this conversation, trying to have sex with somebody before marriage, that you have to be in a certain setting for that to happen, like a pretty private, setting for you to try to attempt that, a reasonable person, right? Versus cussing, you can be, in a group of friends out getting pizza, out to coffee, and then you hear somebody say something and you're like, oh, that's how you talk? Like, I didn't know that. I didn't have to get very close to you to find that out.
That can happen, but it doesn't always happen like that.
Fair. It doesn't, but I'm just saying, kind of comparing, one is like a more casual, I can find this out about you. Because if you're somebody who's like, hey, I don't cuss, I don't like cussing, I don't like being around cussing, sure, maybe I have friends, family members who do it, but I can't control, my family. But as far as who I'm going to link up with for the rest of my life, or who I'm going to spend individual time with, dating and things like that, I don't want to hear that. And whatever your reasons are, because there's plenty of people who aren't saved, who don't love Jesus, who don't even think about Jesus, who really do not like cussing. I grew up around some people who were like consider themselves very academic and intellectual, whatever. And I think I don't know if your dad says this too, but like cussing is just a lazy way of talking. Like there's more interesting words.
He said a lack of vocabulary.
Yeah, a lack of vocabulary. There's better words for you to
Which
use.
A lot of people don't like that saying, and I can understand.
Who? Why? It's true. Because think about it, all cuss words, they mean so many different things.
Okay, it's like, sure, they could be true, but it's not fully true. I don't cuss, let me just be clear. But somebody could know all the words in the dictionary and still choose to cuss. So that's my only thing with like, how do you know? Anyway, we're getting off the plot here.
That's okay. But yeah, so I think that it's just a matter of if you're talking about, oh, is it gluttony? And if I want to be with somebody who has a gluttony problem, is that equally or just, the same conversation as someone who cusses?
Yeah. So you may be watching this and somebody may be like, I don't know if cursing is bad or not. Like, does the Bible even say, like, is cursing a sin? And there's a lot of people who feel that way, because sometimes it's not very clear, because obviously the Bible talks about like curses, like putting curses on somebody,
sure,
but that doesn't necessarily mean cussing.
Yeah.
And that's something I had struggled with, or not struggled with, but I had thought about a lot. Like, if somebody cusses, like, does that mean they're sinning? And one verse that I've been thinking a lot about lately is Ephesians 5:4. And it talks about obscene stories, foolish talk, and coarse jokes. Those are not for you. Instead, let there be thankfulness to God. And another verse says in Colossians 3:8, but now is the time to get rid of anger, rage, malicious behavior, slander, and dirty language. So even if you don't think the Bible explicitly says cussing is a sin, what is dirty language to you? Like, here's the whole point of this podcast, low key. we're not telling you what you should or shouldn't do, if you should curse or not curse. Really what we're saying is you should take it to God and say, God, this is what your word say. I just heard the verse. What do you say? Like, what are you saying? Because that's what we always want, right, with the pod?
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say is, everything, of course, in God's word is very intentional. Like, the verbiage and the vocabulary that he chose to have these people write down for us. And something like dirty language, I think, is very vague because it's going to adapt to each culture. It's because, how they say if it doesn't, preach overseas, doesn't preach across languages, then it's not Bible. So every culture, every language has their own version of cursing and dirty language or whatever that is, things that you don't say on, in front of the king or in front of the pope or in front of your grandma, certain things like that. And that all falls under this phrase of, dirty language. So I think that, it's one of those things that if you want to be religious and be nitpicky about, the D word is not a cuss word, the A word's not a cuss word because it's in certain contexts, but, is the N word a cuss word? Just all these different things that are so, like you said, gray. But at the end of the day, who is it benefiting? Is it glorifying God? Is it edifying yourself? Is it edifying, the people around you? Is it making anybody better? Or is it just causing unnecessary distracting conversations or distracting kind of looks? Because honestly, if you are a Christian who cusses, a lot of people will kind of look at you like confused. And it, in a way, ruins your witness if you're talking to an unbeliever or working with an unbeliever or something like that. And in this case specifically, it could turn off your future spouse potentially from you because you just choose to be unintentional with the words that you use. So it's like, what is it? Because you want to be free? Because, who does it really help? I never really understood this argument because it's like, this is the hill you're going to die on, is being able to say a short list of words that have no meaning, that are not helpful.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's something I wanted to touch on, was the whole concept of being set apart. Because honestly, this is the question that we all should ask ourselves. And please hear us. Pauline and I, we say this all the time on the podcast. We are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but we do try our best to be set apart and to live for God. Because if you watch the same shows everybody else watch, you listen to the same music everybody else watch, you speak the same way everybody else in the world does, how can you say you're set apart? Yeah. Like, what about you makes you set apart? That's this question that we have to ask ourselves and really evaluate, like, am I really living a set apart life? And for me, I remember when I first got saved, I had a friend who was like saved as well, and kind of we were walking through this Christian life together, and I had immediately stopped cussing because I knew, or I just felt in my spirit like, this ain't right. Yeah. I shouldn't cuss. Now, I'm gonna be honest with y'all. On the basketball court, it took me a little longer. Like, I went cold turkey everywhere else except the basketball court.
Are you saying basketball brings something worse in you?
No, I'm not. I'm saying at the time that was one place I was struggling at.
Just kidding. I love basketball, so it's fine.
So
go Celtics.
You're having a great time.
I really am enjoying myself.
I'm happy for you. So I remember I was still struggling on the basketball court, but thankfully got over that fairly quickly. But I remember I stopped saying every other word, every other place, except for the N word. Like, that was a word I was still saying. And a lot of people don't think it's a curse word, whatever. I'm not trying to get into that conversation. But I remember that he brought it up. He just asked me a question like, yo, why do you still say that? And I remember I had to really ask myself, like, why am I still saying that?
Right.
And for me, it was a matter of, if this is going to cause me to not be set apart and, like you're talking about, affect my witness to other people for Christ, then it's not even worth saying. Now, again, some of y'all mad because some of y'all be saying that all day, every day. And look, that's a conversation you can have.
I mean, it's Lord. Like, I really understand, or I can understand, like, our words are such a big part of our everyday life. Of course, how we communicate with others, with God, words in our mind. Language is so important. It's one of the pillars of culture. And some people really find, like, a deep comfort in the certain words that they use, whether it be slang from, like, the area that they're from or something like that, and not wanting to, like, give that up if they move away, but also kind of in, like, curse words. And, like, especially if you grew up in a culture and a family where like that's how people spoke and that's how you express yourself and that's when people took you seriously and that's when how you got people's attention was speaking like that, I kind of understand. But it's like, what if the Lord is calling you out? What if he's asking you to trust him, to lean on him to get you the attention that you need in conversations and to get laughs or whatever it is, instead of relying on, you know, something that is divisive and confusing? Because, you know, the Bible does talk to us about how powerful our words are and how the power of life and death lies in the tongue. And it's like, it's something that maybe we really should just take a step back and consider our words, and like not even just, you know, using curse words, but just all of our words, like flippantly saying things or not saying things, and building each other up, building ourselves up.
Yeah.
You know, words are really, I mean, the Lord used words to create the earth. So words are very, very powerful.
One thing that helped me was I was thinking about the men and women of God that I looked up to or admired. And I was like, I've never met somebody that I truly wanted to be like, who was truly trying to imitate and be like Christ, who was out here just cursing and just saying any old type of thing. Like that for me sold me. That's not gonna sell everybody, but that for me was like, yeah, like I don't know
who you want to be.
Yeah, who do I want to be? Like, do I want to? And that just wasn't someone I personally wanted to be using that type of language. But to get back onto the dating track, because I don't want to overlook this part of the question. This person was like, should it be an automatic deal breaker?
Sure.
And I'm gonna say, I don't think it has to be. Because you started bringing up a good thing about preferences.
Yeah.
And I think that's important in dating. A lot of times we forget that just because somebody doesn't want to date somebody that has kids already doesn't mean they're a bad person or a bad Christian. You know? Like, it's just a preference, and that's okay. That's not a bad thing. Now, if you think cussing is a sin and you don't feel good about dating somebody like that, obviously don't do it. I personally, when we were dating, had no desire to date anybody that cursed, because I knew that wasn't something that I did. But I understand that it may have been an easier choice for me at 23 or 21 when we first started dating than at 31. I'm not saying that makes it right, but I'm just being honest with somebody listening to this. Like,
you have less choices.
Yeah, like, bro, I don't know that many people that ain't out here that do love Jesus.
It's real. But I guess I just think about, like, it's all about the person's heart. It's all about somebody's heart. Even when you talk about gluttony and, like, you know, if you walked in and saw me eating a whole, you know, bag of Oreo thins, you're like, oh, I'm breaking up with you, you know, you're gluttonous. And it's like, hold on a second. Last week, I was eating 3 of these bad boys at once. Now I'm only down to 1. You know, maybe in a month or 2, I'll leave you down to, you know, progress. And I think that if you were to hear my heart, you would say, oh, she wants to do better. She's trying, she's making progress. That's what you want to hear, is like what people's heart is. And that's, you know, the Bible says that, but it's the heart the mouth speaks. So that's why it's really important to observe, of course, while you're dating, but don't just observe. Observe and ask questions and listen to what people say. Listen to their responses. Sometimes we get so kind of like, oh, I'm spy out the land, I'm be a spy, I'm observing to see. But you don't really understand until you talk to somebody, because everyone's situations are different. And like I said, you don't know where that person has come from. So if you are dating somebody or you're thinking about dating somebody, but you hear them constantly saying the D word or the A word or words that are like culturally like softer cuss words or whatever it is, and you're like, oh, that's such a turn off. But if that's the only thing there can't be the only thing wrong with them. But if that's the biggest red flag to you, and you're like, wow, otherwise I would really be interested in getting to know them, then I think that it's worth the conversation to say, like, hey, I noticed you said this, like, kind of what's your opinion on cussing, using these words, you know, whatever. Yeah. Or why do you, like Tim just say with his story, his friend told him, like, why do you say that? And
I was going to bring that up, back to that story. Like, that is really true what you're saying, the power of just having a conversation. Yeah. Again, you don't have to do this. If your stance is, I'm not dating anybody that cusses, that's okay. Like, you're not wrong for that. But this is for the person who is like, there's this one person who everything else checks out. They seem to love God. They seem to be tithing. They seem to be living upright. But for some reason, I hear them saying these words. Having that conversation is beneficial, because you don't know, like Pauline said, they just may have never even considered, like, oh, this is a curse word. Like, it's so culturally acceptable that for whatever reason, this person just thinks, oh, this is just a regular word. Yeah. So then you're able to have that conversation. And then, like you said, it's about the heart. What if they were like, yo, this is not the person I want to be, or I don't want to talk like this. Yeah. I'm going to work to get better on that. Right. Then that's an opportunity for you to continue to get to know them and see, are they working to get better on that? And that doesn't mean that the next time you go on a date with them, they may not say one curse word. But it does mean if they do say a curse word, do they keep talking, or do they instantly do they catch themselves? Like, that's growth. Like, sometimes in dating we want this perfect person, and that's just not realistic, because there's an area in your life right now that God is like, you need some work on that.
Multiple areas.
Yeah. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think it's important to be gracious, and I think that there's so many times we're crying and begging God for a spouse, for a partner, for a date, for something, and He gives us opportunities, and we find reasons to not try or to write people off. And again, I'm talking about if you're at that place where you've not even had the conversation with the person. If you're talk to them and they're like, yeah, this is how I talk, and God can just, pardon me on this. Yeah. And like,
or they're like, well, I'm a baby level Christian, entry level Christian.
Or people told me, or people talking about, oh, like God said it's okay for me to talk however I want to talk. That's not even really true, because nobody out, like, we all have things we need to work on. And as far as if God told you to cuss, that's so interesting. But I mean, you just learn something about them. And like, tell me more about that.
Yeah, and this is the thing about godly dating. Like, we can't forget, you can't do godly dating without God. Yeah. So as you're going, because the Bible talks about how the Lord orders our steps, as you're moving along in the dating process, you should be checking in with God. Like, hey, God, you heard this conversation, or you heard this person say that. What do you think about this? Right. Like, is this somebody you want me to continue to get to know and connect with?
And, because and your community too, like looping in friends, if you have trusted like mentors or married friends, like people who are just further along in their love life journey than you are, your parents, older siblings, whatever, like looping them in as well. Because like what you don't want to do is like, number one, talk yourself out of dating someone, making something a bigger deal than it actually is or it could be, or you don't want to shove something under the rug and then later it becomes this big problem. Because you also don't want to end up in a situation where you're like, oh, well, yeah, he used to cuss, when we were dating, and now we're married, and I can't stand it, and, I don't respect him because of the way he talks. It's hard for me to kind of look at him as a leader or a spiritual leader of our home, of our future kids, things like that. You don't want it to become this bigger issue, not all really stemming from the cussing, but really stemming from the lack of honest conversations, the lack of challenging each other, the lack of asking good questions, and the lack of inviting Jesus into your relationship. Because that's all it really could be. Like, maybe God is looking at it like, all right, cool, you see something, are you going to ask me for help, or are you going to try to fix it on your own? And you don't want to have a relationship that you built, because you're going to have to be the one to sustain it.
Yeah. Don't run from hard questions in talking or dating, because honestly, a lot of the issues
or friendship.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of issues in marriage today are from a lack of healthy conversations. For some reason, two people are not able to sit down and have a healthy conversation about whatever topic, and it allows that topic to fester and grow, and then you forget about what you're actually arguing about, and now it's turned into something else. And sometimes you're not able to have a healthy conversation with just you two, and that's when the Bible actually says you should go and get counsel and have a third party be able to listen. And we've done that in our relationship. There's times when we weren't able to see eye to eye. We had to go sit down with another couple and say, hey, can you help us? Can you walk us through? And don't be afraid of that. I know that this is a little off topic, but I know that this weekend you were talking to an older lady, or you heard an older lady say that a lot of people have issues with conflict, and that's why they may get divorced or something like that. And do you remember what I'm talking about? I don't know if who was telling you that, or what. You told me something about a situation where someone's like, this person got divorced because...
Oh yeah. But that was more about like arguing and like arguing in marriage.
What is arguing? Not being able to have a healthy conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I guess a lot of people, it's just so tough because so many of us are like kind of scarred by our childhood and like our parents' marriages. And like, I mean, I definitely saw my parents argue, but it was never to the point where I was like afraid, you know, like, oh, I'm scared that like something bad is going to happen. And I guess that's like kudos to my parents for not arguing in such a way, because of course I'm sure there's plenty of kids out there that, you know, they grew up feeling very, very afraid whenever their parents fought. But yeah, I think, you know, it just was to the point of what you're referencing of, you know, being able to see healthy conflict. And it's tough because like, I even think about this coming up in like the workplace of people being non-confrontational and like just being afraid of like people not liking them or rubbing somebody the wrong way, or just not kind of like, I guess the root of it is like people pleasing and like wanting everybody to like you and wanting everybody to be happy with you. And not just that overall, because of course everybody wants friends, everybody wants to be liked, but I think kind of like keeping things big picture. And I want to say that women struggle with this more than men, just off my own experiences and conversations with people. But it's more like sometimes women were so like, oh, every time I see you, I want to know that you like me. Every time I email you, every time we text, every time we have a conversation, I want to know that we're good. Versus I think guys sometimes will like lean in, not as often as girls do, but when they do lean in and they do have those conversations, they're like, this is for your good, like overall. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think it's, you know, what you were talking about was being able to recognize that conflict is healthy, and that asking a question, an example of like, hey, why do you say that word? Somebody could be offended by that. And like your friend who asked you that, obviously like he trusted you at least enough to ask that question and not care if you did get angry or if you did blow up at your response. But I think he loved you enough to know like, I don't care if he gets mad, like he needs to know that this is a question he needs to ask himself, you know, and like, do you even have any answer for this? And it's interesting because it reminds me in the Bible, it talks about like always have, like I'm messing up the verse, but it's something about always have a defense, or like always be ready to explain your faith. That's what it says. And I think that like that's such a really cool like instruction or challenge, especially if we apply it to like every area of our lives. Like always be ready to explain why you chose the career you chose. Always be able to explain, you know, your schedule, your friendships, why you married who you married. Always be ready to explain, you know, why you dress the way that you dress. You know, don't just wear things because it's trendy, or, you know, whatever, the books that you read, what you mentioned earlier about being set apart. And I think that, you know, when you don't have explanations for things, you can kind of feel like offended in a way if somebody asks you about it. And it's not even that you're offended that somebody asks a question. It's more about like you're maybe a little bit embarrassed that you don't have an explanation for it. So kind of like coming from that place, if you're on the receiving end, somebody asks you, hey, why do you cuss? And you're like, I don't really know. But why would you ask me that? Like everybody talks this way. And it's like, well, that's not really, you know, a strong answer. But if that's your answer, then okay, great. But I think that at the end of the day, we can be very, very afraid of conflict and confrontation. But all confrontation, I think when you start with questions, it's more of a gentler approach, you know, like with what your friend did. Mm-hmm. But sometimes, even when you go as gentle as you can go, people are going to be offended. They're going to be offended. But at the end of the day, it's like, well, I'm being quietly offended by every time you cuss. And like, you know, I'm sitting here just kind of taking it. And that's not me respecting myself by being in a relationship or a friendship, or honestly being in the presence of somebody who's speaking in a way that offends my heart and potentially offends my Savior, depending on, you know, if we're going to say that it's a sin or not. So I think that you have to be okay with not pleasing people and being confrontational if you're going to have a healthy relationship. So if you are afraid to ask somebody, oh, why do you cuss? Why do you say these words? Because you don't want to cause problems. I mean, what else are you not being honest with them about? in your relationship.
Yeah, that's definitely something to consider because it plays a huge role in relationships in general. One thing I want to touch on really quick that I don't want to get overlooked. The question said, is someone who doesn't cuss a preference? And then they said, like, we can work through that. And I just want to touch on that "we" word. Because sometimes when you're dating, it can be a little, the lines can get blurry really quick between being single and then acting like you're married sometimes. And I'm not saying that when you're dating, you intentionally don't help somebody. Mm-hmm. But what I am trying to say, it's not your job to make them get healthy or make them fix whatever issue or thing that they're trying to fix or overcome. Like, you just have to be careful because sometimes you can get in a place where you're trying to coach somebody to be something that they're not ready to be because you want that relationship to work so bad. Yeah. And it's like, if they're not in a place where they're ready to overcome whatever struggle, challenge, sin, fill in the blank that they're going through, you can't try to force it and make it happen because, one, that's not healthy, and two, that's not really your place to sit there and try to do it. Sometimes it can become a unhealthy codependency thing where you're trying to get them to become something that they're just not ready to be.
Yeah, and even like the kind of like working through what is a preference, because if you prefer somebody who doesn't cuss, and you mentioned this earlier, like, okay, just because I say I have a preference with them and actually somebody is in front of my face and somebody actually has an option, your choices don't always match your preferences. And I think that preferences are tricky because they shouldn't affect the bottom line, like in the sense like a deal breaker is a requirement. It's a requirement that I marry somebody that's a Christian. But I do think that preferences have to be a little bit more shallow than cussing.
Like 5'2". Like, I don't want to date somebody 5'2".
No, it's not for me, but for somebody else perhaps.
So what are you saying? What is the preference?
I'm talking about, I would prefer somebody who's blonde. Something that can change. Something that is very, like, again, shallow, frivolous. Does that make sense?
But technically somebody could change from cussing.
Well, yes, they could. But also, if they don't, how much is that going to affect the rest of your life?
And if they don't change their hair blonde,
that's not going to really matter. What is that going to change? What is that going to affect?
I don't know. I'm just trying to make sure people are tracking with what you're trying to say.
Well, I'm just saying, maybe, I think cussing should not be a preference. I think that cussing should be, wherever you stand on it, I think that it should be something that you are solid on what you're looking for. So if you are okay with it, then be okay with it. You know, between you and the Lord. I'm not okay with it. I would not recommend it. But I think that I don't think that you should date somebody saying, okay, the biggest problem I have with them is their mouth. Because I think that's what it comes down to. It's not just the words that you use, but how you use all of your words. And you just taking your words seriously in general. The biggest problem I have with them is their mouth. Do I want this mouth speaking over my kids? Do I want this mouth, praying over me? Things like that. Going through hard storms, going through sickness, going through times of turmoil during our marriage. And if this mouth that I'm about to marry potentially doesn't change, I'm okay with that. That's what a preference is. A preference is like, if this doesn't change, I am at peace. I wouldn't be at peace with that, personally.
Right. And what I was trying to say when I was saying be careful when you're trying to say we work through something in dating is you really want to see them put in the work. Yeah. They're the ones that are working through whatever they want to work through.
Yeah, or not.
And you can come alongside and cheer them on.
Right.
But it's not something that you're actively working with them. When me and Pauline were dating, I was still in college. And when we first started dating, I had to struggle with being lazy and failing classes because I just wasn't taking it seriously. It wasn't her job to work it through with me. She didn't need to be up at night studying with me for me to work through that. I had to be the one to put in the work to study and make sure I passed my classes and graduated. And that's what I'm saying when I say you don't need to be doing it with them, but you can still cheerlead and support. Like, if I got a good grade, she'd be like, you're doing a great job.
But I also asked you a question, too. It was like, okay, so you got this grade. What are you going to do about it? But it wasn't like, oh, you got that grade, okay, well, good luck. You know, it was a conversation. I asked questions. So I think that, you know, we're talking about we working through things together. That's where the question comes in. Okay, what's going on with your mouth? What's going on with these words that you're using? And if they're telling you nothing's going on with it. If you had said, these are my grades and this is how they're going to be, I'd be like, all right, good luck. Like, but, you know, you said, oh, no, these are my goals. This is what I want to change. This is my next step. Okay, great. I love that. That's awesome. So,
and you allowed me to say that. You didn't say this is what you should do. You didn't try to lead me into saying the right answer you wanted to hear.
That's why you have to be careful with things like this. Is like when you're in a dating stage or even before, it's like you're not trying to teach. And if you ask them, hey, what's up with these words that you're using, and they say like, oh, I never knew there was a problem with it, say, oh, okay, like, yeah, you might want to look into it. You know, I've heard X, Y, and Z about it personally. Or you can just share your own story of like, hey, I don't use those words because X, you know, da 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 da, all of your reasons. And they might say, oh, that's good for you, or like, oh, okay, you know, maybe I will look into that myself. That sounds very interesting. Because a lot of times people just don't know. Like, nobody knows every Bible verse. Nobody knows, you know, just watch every sermon on YouTube. It's just not possible. So, you just, and especially if they come from a home that's not Christian, or they just don't have that background, that upbringing, maybe like you did, and they just have more to learn, and that is okay. Because honestly, I would rather be with somebody who had a lot to work on and was working on it than somebody who thought that they were perfect and was like coasting through life and missing God and missing, you know, growth opportunities. Like somebody who is growing is a really, really, really good sign.
Yeah. Amen. Great place to land there. I just want to leave you with this verse because we're saying a lot of things, and sometimes we talk about sin and you talk about what people should do or shouldn't do. People can get a little weird, and at the end of the day, we always just want to point you back to Christ. And Titus 2:11-14 says this: "For the grace of God has been revealed, bringing salvation to all people, and we are instructed to turn from godless living and sinful pleasures. We should live in this evil world with wisdom, righteousness, and devotion to God, while we look forward to hope, to that wonderful day when the glory of our great God and Savior Jesus Christ will be revealed." Last sentence: "He gave his life to free us from every kind of sin, to cleanse us, and to make us his very own people, totally committed to doing good deeds." And I think that last part is so good, being totally committed to doing good deeds in order to give God glory. And that's what we want to leave you with. Like, whatever you feel about cursing or not cursing, just take it to the Lord. And Lord, I want to be a person who's totally committed to doing your will. And if I'm doing anything that's allowing me to not do that, please reveal it to me. And if you go to God with a humble heart, he will definitely speak. So this has been another episode of the W Podcast. We'll see y'all next week.
Bye.
Thanks for watching this video.
To get more Christian relationship advice, subscribe to our channel.
And make sure you check out our other videos as well.